Hi there, I'm Kristen, and today I'll be talking about whether the near-term disclosure that's going to happen in regards to non-human intelligence will be catastrophic due to details coming out from a hybridization program. So when I was preparing to make this video today, I was thinking a lot about how in the news there's been so much discussion about disclosure and specifically catastrophic disclosure. And so catastrophic disclosure is when the government either doesn't put out enough details about what might be coming or information that might be revealed, or they completely omit details and there ends up being a moment in time or a point where there's whistleblowers or some major event or just something happening where everybody suddenly becomes aware of kind of really shocking information. There would be ontological shock that completely kind of touches upon people's belief systems and can shake what they believe our reality is and what our world is. And so because so many people have been talking about this, my mind started circling back to kind of like the predictions and prophecies of major change coming between like 2027 and 2030. And so we've heard this from Chris Bledsoe. We've heard this from like the whistleblower Bill Wood, who was part of the Project Looking Glass mission that was out in Iraq. There's been like lots and lots of people that are experiencers, contactees who have gotten this kind of like 2027 message that something major would be happening and kind of the whole world would change based on what we're going to learn. And so while I was thinking a lot about that, I was going back to kind of like recent interviews that have been happening in regards to disclosure. And I was noticing in the details that were being discussed that people weren't really focusing on like kind of this cosmic change or pole shift or solar flash or any of the kind of like major like earth changes or environmental changes that many abductees have talked about over the years. Like a lot of these politicians and people that were part of programs and part of the government, they were mentioning hybridization specifically. And so this was tough for me to kind of get through and like realizing that everybody is talking about these kind of like crossbreeding programs and somewhat insinuating that like information was going to come out in regards to what's been happening there. And so this video will be a little bit longer than my typical videos because there are two clips that I wanted to include that are longer from Colonel Carl Nell and from like a long clip from a Jillian Michaels interview with Lou Elizondo. But they all kind of touch on this interbreeding. And the way that it's kind of discussed is as if it's horrific. It's something that kind of like really horrible that is being done to people in America, people throughout the globe. Yeah, it's this is a hard one. So please bear with me as I kind of like get through the different examples that I've noticed that have been coming up about this hybridization program and how this might be the impetus for like why disclosure is happening and what will be discussed. So notably, we had, again, Lou Elizondo. So he was the director of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program called ATIP. He was on Jillian Michaels' podcast, her program in the past couple of weeks. So that was on May 17th that he was on her program. And before they kind of launched into what Lou was thinking about was going on with the hybridization program, like Jillian shared a couple of clips of Representatives Matt Gaetz and Tim Burchett talking about how there is hybridization going on, or they were both briefed on this, and it's disturbing. Matt Gaetz kind of like almost like kind of laughs it off, brushes it off, even though he was kind of told that he was briefed. Tim Burchett takes it a lot more seriously, and it was based on kind of Tim Burchett's response that I think Jillian wanted to ask Lou what he thought was going on, and Lou seemed to kind of confirm what was being said and the types of briefings that were being held. And even though he didn't have any firsthand knowledge, he did kind of like overturn the apple cart, I would almost say. He seemed to kind of the way that he presented it really bothered Jillian, and I think that her reaction is the reaction that I had, the reaction that a lot of us will be having as we kind of realize that these mass breeding programs have been going on. So here's that clip.
Well, I've got to be honest, this is the craziest set of questions I've ever put together for any interview. And if it was any other moment in time throughout history, this would be effectively the end of both of our careers. But in fact, we're just commenting on what's going on in Congress, what's going on with our president, and what's going on in the mainstream media, which feels insane. So I want to get to the missing scientists, but before we do, I need to show you this clip of Congressman Tim Burchett On Newsmax, I'm not going to say another word. Team SOT 2, please.
Former colleague of yours, Matt Gaetz, making some pretty shocking statements yesterday about aliens. Take a look.
I had someone come and brief me who was in a military uniform, worked for the United States Army, that was briefing me on the locations of hybrid breeding programs where captured aliens were breeding with humans to create some hybrid race that could engage in intergalactic communication. Aliens that were living were in forced breeding programs with humans that had been abducted from war zones and from even the caravans of migrants.
All right. I mean, I don't have the tinfoil hat on just yet, Congressman, but I'm wondering, kind of how you react to that, because you are connected. You're on the UFO subcommittee. I mean, I'm just wondering what you make of that. Have you heard anything like that?
Well, I'm still a member of Congress, so I can't really comment too much on what Matt said. But I will say this.
Wait, seriously? Are you being serious, or is that
I'm being
tongue-in-cheek?
100% serious.
Okay.
I've been 100% serious. I've been briefed by just about every alphabet agency there is. And I'll just tell you this. If they would release the things that I've seen, you would stay up. You'd be up at night worrying about or thinking about this stuff. We just need to disclose it all. I'm sick of it. Well, I was briefed. I'll just tell you this. I was briefed last week on an issue, or excuse me, 2 weeks ago. And it would have set the earth on. This country would have come unglued, I think, if they would have heard all that I heard. They would demand answers.
Okay, so where do we start? Should we start with an alien hybrid breeding program where they're capturing caravans of immigrants and forcing them into this? Or should we start with the fact that a congressman who is well respected thinks that if this is fully disclosed, it's going to set the country on fire? I'm going to hand this one over to you here. I'm speechless.
Sure. Well, first of all, I've had the privilege of speaking to Representative Tim Burchett and his colleagues, and what he's saying regarding access to very sensitive information, he's absolutely correct. Some of the people that briefed those individuals, I personally know. They were colleagues of mine back in the day. He's absolutely correct that some of the population, I think, would probably be potentially concerned about how much we know about this topic, and for several reasons. We can go into that. Now, as far as this notion of alien crossbreeding and hybridization, let me just preface this. When I was in the Pentagon at ATIP, I was a nuts and bolts kind of guy, so really airframe, air integrity, the material science and propulsion behind the vehicles themselves, not so much the occupants. But what Gaetz is referring to is something called, in the vernacular, it's known throughout kind of the UFO community as MyLabs. And what it suggests is that there's been a long-standing agreement or understanding between us and our friends from out of town that have allowed us to work with whatever these are, in a cooperative agreement, and in exchange for that, supposedly they would have access to certain human specimens biologically in order to test. I have to say, first and foremost, I heard about that while I was at the Pentagon. I was not privy to the specifics of that. From my understanding, that relationship began, if it is true, sometime in the 1950s. And has continued. I have met several individuals, former intelligence officers for the Air Force and other services, who swear by it, who actually say they've had encounters with UAP and have seen military personnel in and around the vehicles, and as if, very nonchalant, as if it was supposed to be. I have to be careful with going into any type of speculation about hybridization or any type of scientific study or research, because, again, that was not my forte. But what I will say is I've had plenty of individuals tell me verbatim that the military is far more, the military industrial complex is far more involved in this topic than anyone really knows. There are cases which seem rather interesting, where you have in some cases UAP potentially being escorted by American fighter jets and allied fighter jets. So that would give you some sense of cooperation maybe between us and whatever they are. I can't tell you for certain because simply I wasn't privy to that, if that indeed existed. But I will also say it's really not that far of a stretch if we were to come into contact with, let's say, just another nation, right? So let's look at it this way from a real perspective. There are tribes right now that are isolated in the Amazon and also in the South Pacific, and we have these no-go zones. Basically, we're not going to interfere with these indigenous people and their development because they've never had outside exposure. They haven't been exposed to recent diseases and things like that, and it could cause a significant problem for them. But once one culture decides to engage another culture here on Earth, right? Forget about out there, just right here. You have an exchange of ideas. You have agreements between the different peoples. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You can go back and look at the conquistadors during their La Reconquista, or the reconquering, where their interaction with indigenous people didn't go so well, right? Same here in the United States, where we maybe did some things that we probably shouldn't have towards indigenous people. In other cases, it was a little bit more symbiotic. So let's get back to the question you're having, specifically about hybrids and alien hybrids. I don't know. I do know that there are people out there that swear by it. There are people that have been in the military and intelligence officials that have told me it, that have no reason to question their credibility. They've never lied to me, certainly. But I don't have firsthand knowledge of that, of hybridization or forced hybridization. And if that is the case, then I think Representative Burchett is absolutely correct, because if now we have, if it's true that there's a scenario where we have elements of the American government wittingly cooperating with something else and allowing human beings to be against their own will, right, be taken. Well, from my perspective, when I was a special agent, that's called kidnapping, right? That's a felony offense. And then if they are touched in any way, right, that's called assault, right? So there's a lot of issues here that legally, fundamentally, I think we would have a problem with. Then you have the other information that I know Representative Burchett has had access to, along with some of his other colleagues like Luna and Burleson. That could be very disturbing, because it shows that maybe we have been a little bit more complicit with this topic than we have previously stated. Keep in mind, we spent decades saying nothing to see here, folks. It's not real. This is not, this is silly. Turns out we were spending a lot of taxpayer money, a lot of your money, actually, researching this topic. And I was part of that effort. And so were many of my colleagues. And it turns out that, there are things that go bump in the night. And that can be very disturbing for some people, especially from a philosophical perspective or a theological perspective, and even a psychological perspective.
Also this week, we had Ross Coulthart of News Nation talking about catastrophic disclosure once again.
But boy, what a week. I mean, what can you say when you have Lou Elizondo, for example, the former UAP investigations guy inside the Pentagon, admitting that he has been told by people in the intelligence community inside the military-industrial complex about hybridization of human beings and aliens. Wow, this is something that Matt Gaetz, the former Representative Matt Gaetz from Congress, I think in an interview recently, he did an interview from Florida where he talked about allegations that had been put to him by somebody in uniform saying that there was a hybridization program going on. Can things get any weirder? It's high strangeness at the moment. It's quite extraordinary. I am waiting with bated breath to see what comes in the next tranche release. I'm told there is a massive pushback, that there are sections of the CIA, as we've told you last week, that are pushing back mercilessly, trying to tell the administration that release would compromise national security, that the public shouldn't be told this stuff. It's going to be very interesting to see how much moral courage the president and his team show up against a national security complex that frankly doesn't want this story told.
So he kind of mentioned how Carl Nell, he felt that he kind of coined the term catastrophic disclosure. I don't know if that's really true, but he kind of led from talking about Colonel Nell into talking about an interview he had with Brent Friedman. And so Brent Friedman is the writer and producer of Dark Skies. And he was told by Reagan's energy secretary named John S. Harrington that there was a secret related to non-human intelligence that left him weeping for his daughters. So you can fill in the blank there, and I'll show this clip right now.
Brent Friedman has related to us about admissions made by John Harrington that when he was at the DOE working under President Reagan, he was briefed into the legacy UAP retrieval aliens program. Quite extraordinary allegations that Mr. Harrington reportedly makes, but Brent's allegations, of course, although I do believe them, are hearsay. And it would be hoped that one day, as disclosure hopefully rolls out, good men, patriots like John Harrington, feel that it's okay to talk about what they were told and what they know. There's a poignant moment in John Harrington's account to Brent Friedman of what he says he was told. He wept for his daughters because of what he was told about this secret. And I do caution people, there are ontological shocks, I'm told, in what we may be being about to be told. I'm sceptical that the government's got the moral courage to reveal the full extent of this secret. It's going to be very interesting as the rollout happens, if indeed it does happen over the next few months, to see what we are told. Because there are people, not John Harrington perhaps, but there are people in the legacy program who are waiting to see what the Trump administration is going to do about disclosure. And if they don't deal honestly with the public, there will be catastrophic disclosure.
So my takeaway from what was just said in that interview is that when Harrington was focusing on specifically his daughters, you have to think like, why would something only affect young women? You know, what would it be that would specifically bother or interfere with young women's lives that wouldn't affect anybody else in the population? And just my conclusion from that, I mean, you can make your own conclusion, is that it's because of this breeding program that happens between like puberty up through typically the 30s. For women, it's usually younger. Women abductees are usually between puberty and into their 20s when they're taken. Men can be taken much later in life for sperm. But the abduction process and how kind of invasive that is upon young women when this hybridization occurs, it seems to be a lot more traumatic for women than it ends up being for men. So there are a lot of men who have said that, like, I was told to go and use a device in order to provide this genetic material to non-human intelligence, like physical grays, or whether they're tall or short, or mantids, versus for women, they occasionally have been having full-on physical encounters, but in many cases, there are instruments that are kind of inserted into women in order to retrieve eggs, or there are cuts made in order to retrieve eggs or retrieve a fetus that might be in there that one of these beings is taking. And obviously there's nothing anywhere near as invasive going on with men. Men might also have like one-on-one physical interactions with beings. They're typically kind of accompanied by screen visions where they might be seeing something more beautiful and more nice looking or more human-like than what is actually in front of them, or there are feelings put onto them that kind of subdue the trauma and subdue the chaos of what's occurring in that moment. So it's been kind of, hearing this is really disturbing, to hear that the government is commenting on this, and that there are quite possibly military agreements made between the US government specifically, our military, and kind of these beings in order for these breeding programs to kind of continue on. And so it's kind of had me scratching my head and thinking, well, if this has been going on for decades, which it has been, I mean, there's many researchers that have spoken about this, many contactees, abductees that have spoken about these things happening to them, then why is this coming to a head right now? And so it seems like we're in like a final countdown where whatever agreements might have been made about this hybridization crossbreeding program, maybe those agreements are now reaching their end in the 2027 to 2030 period. And now it's going to ramp up or calm down, or perhaps the hybrid children that were made from this program are going to now be reintroduced back to our planet and back into kind of like open public spaces. There's a lot of different theories and thoughts about like why this would be happening in this time period. And it just seems like, however you cut it, it seems like everybody is going to know about the fact that this has been happening, and quite possibly the ramifications of why this was done, how many children were made, what the children's lives were actually like, why they've been living the way that they've been living for all these years since these children were produced or taken from their parents. So it's really disturbing. And so I also wanted to kind of cut back to some comments that Colonel Carl Nell made at a SALT conference a couple of years ago. So that was in May 2024. And so he made comments about how it seems like this time in history, we might be going back to another Bronze Age. And the Bronze Age was an era where multiple civilizations kind of fell apart. And so he cites kind of economic strife, cultural differences, and then also like these types of things happening, like that kind of involve other issues or other events beyond the scope of what we understand or what we're aware of, just like major changes happening. And when he was asked by the interviewer whether this is negative or what to kind of think about all this going on, his answer was also disturbing. I mean, I guess you could take this in a good way or a bad way. It's unsettling for me, I suppose. But Carl Nell said essentially to get your affairs in order with your religion and to be devout and devoted to what it is that you believe in regards to angels or messengers of God. And this is something that Colonel Nell also said at the Soul Foundation conference. He said that they might be messengers of God, and that was something that I directly heard from one of these beings telepathically before I even knew who Colonel Carl Nell was. And so hearing him say this phrase and how important it is now in multiple lectures, interviews, matching up with my own experience, I believe that he is right, that whatever is going on is spiritual in nature, and there's going to be probably some type of big spiritual event or some type of major global change that's going to kind of threaten or test people's religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, and kind of how much faith that they have in God.
What do you think happens if we don't disclose? I know you mentioned this idea of catastrophic disclosure. Maybe disclosure may be forced upon us. How do you think about that?
So the situation is usually thought of as a binary state. It's like an all or nothing. And people have sort of argued this. But anybody paying attention realizes the government has already indicated that unidentified anomalous phenomena are real, they're not ours, and they're not our adversaries. The Pentagon has said that. Like, for people that are paying attention, like, that shoe already dropped. So for a lot of people, they think that the second shoe to drop is this is non-human intelligence, and maybe the conversation stops there. Like, the president comes out and says, there's non-human intelligence. The truth is that will precipitate this crescendo of other questions that maybe the government's not ready to answer, that will court, if not precipitate, potential negative ramification for society. And so as an example of this, I would actually point to something from the ancient past, the Bronze Age collapse. So Eric Klein, Princeton University, 2015, wrote a very interesting book called 1177 BC, the year that civilization failed. And so this is well known to current scholarship. Within a single lifetime, all of the very effective ancient civilizations of the Bronze Age failed due to a confluence of reasons that are not necessarily fully understood today. So we're talking about Egypt, the Hittite Empire, the Minoan Empire, the Manassean Empire, the Babylonian Empire. All these civilizations failed, never to return, other than, let's say, Egypt. And so these were highly sophisticated civilizations with highly developed infrastructures, highly developed administrative states. They were globalist in a sense, very similar to today in terms of the known world, the known Near East. They were economically interdependent. They had both diplomatic ties and commerce ties. And yet these civilizations failed in a single lifetime because of stressors that these civilizations collectively could not address within the time frame. And so if we look at our society today, one might argue that it's similarly fractured, similarly under economic stress, similarly under cultural stress as well, fractured and fragile diplomatic situation. It mirrors very much this scenario.
Yeah.
And so for a responsible decision maker, that is certainly a factor.
And so I guess when you say that, are you implying that perhaps we as a society may not be ready for disclosure? Or are you saying that we may not be able to defend ourselves against this other force?
So there's sort of different viewpoints on whether people are ready to deal with this phenomenon. And popular culture is kind of infused with this stuff. Roswell became a meme a long time ago. We got programs on ancient aliens, Skinwalker Ranch, all this stuff. I guess I would draw an analogy, though, for people that believe in a certain faith tradition, whatever that faith tradition is, and hold to that and subscribe to that in a very serious and devout way, and sort of pose the question, even for folks of that ilk, and I would count myself as one, if you're confronted with the reality of your religious belief system, like the reality of the metaphysical, an angel, a messenger from God, what have you, that's going to be a sea state change in your way of dealing with reality, right? Even though you already believe it, right? So it's one thing to believe and it's another to know. And I think in this context, this phenomena has the potential for an analogous effect both on the individual and on society.
Yeah, but do you think that the phenomena, this non-human form of intelligence, represents a threat to humanity?
So this is a good question too, and some of the other folks have sort of framed things in that light. And I guess I would suggest that if the universe is governed by conservation laws, and it's probably reasonable to assume the laws of nature that we understand apply everywhere. We may have incomplete understanding, undoubtedly we do, of these laws, but they're sort of homogeneous and they apply throughout the universe. And so those laws are governed by conservation rules. There's conserved quantities. And so this reality really forces a Darwinian type competition in order to survive. And so it's reasonable to assume any other civilization that's evolved has come up through the same Darwinian evolutionary process. So I think it's naive to expect complete altruism until and unless you get to a state of post-scarcity, where you essentially have no physical needs that we're kind of encumbered with in this universe. And so in some sense, it's the economics of the future that are going to determine whether there's cooperation, competition, or some kind of symbiosis, and inform the intention. But to assume either malintent or complete altruism, I think, is somewhat naive.
Yeah.
So you kind of wrap all of this in a ball, and it really makes you question, like what is going on? Why is it happening? And we don't have the answers to that. Maybe this disclosure that we're going to get about this hybridization program, it's going to provide some answers. I really don't know. But I did want to also, before I kind of close out this video, I wanted to touch on just researchers that have been talking about this for a really long time, because disclosure about hybridization is not new. It's something that's been talked about for many, many years. In Dr. John Mack's book, Abduction, he talks about a lot of different cases and stories of experiencers who were taken and explicitly were taken for breeding sexual matters with non-human intelligence. And he talks about eggs and sperm being taken. And so in this clip with Charlie Rose, he talks about just young women, again, like the weeping for the daughters, young women kind of going missing, and when they returned, there were marks on their bodies.
Something happened in their mind, or did something happen to their physical being?
This has forced me to challenge every category I've had, like in the mind, inside, and outside. For example, sometimes people are witnessed to be missing. A child, for example, this is my own case experience, goes in to find her mother during the time the mother's having an abduction experience. The mother's not there. The child tells the mother in the morning, "Mom, I went into your room, you weren't there." Two young people, fathers are desperate in the morning, young teenage girls, they're gone. They say, yes, we were right here sleeping in the den of one of the girls. I've interviewed both girls, and the father, they came back, they were there. There are lesions on their bodies, there are cuts, there are scoop marks, there are intricate lesions that don't follow anything that could be self-inflicted. One person had quadriplegic that I'm working with has this very complex set of ulcers that follow a pattern on his wrist. He can't have done it to himself. Critics say, well, these are self-inflicted. They're not self-inflicted. But the physical evidence by itself would not stand up.
So that interview was in 1994, so that's going back quite a ways, kind of talking about what was happening with people in regards to breeding. And then Dr. Carla Turner, she had a lecture in 1995 where she talked about kind of this in a crossbreeding hybridization program with contactees. And after she spoke about this, she spoke about how, like, perhaps the reasons why we're told that hybridization is happening, those might not be the real reasons why. And she goes on to kind of talk about how there are lots of physical interactions related to pain and related to kind of drowning feelings and just like really awful situations that kind of these beings or non-human intelligence kind of put upon people, and there's never any explanation given for why it had to happen or what the reason was for any of it. And she kind of says we don't know if it's for the research or for their pleasure, but any way that you cut it, it seems like humans are kind of just being used as like lab rats, essentially, by these beings. So here's a clip of Carla talking about the hybridization program.
They also foster a belief in the alien-human crossbreeding scenario through such repeated procedures as fetal implants and extraction, sperm and ova gathering, baby presentations, and so on. But I think, as Stanton warned us early on, we should remember that without external confirming evidence, we cannot accept this as proof. If we believe the aliens in our race can interbreed, however, it serves a lot of propaganda purposes. It makes us think we have some shared commonality, which makes us more receptive to their presence and activities. If we think we share offspring with them, this belief binds us to them even more so, just as royal marriages used to try to bind competing political parties when one wanted control over the other. The crossbreeding scenario also can lead us to see ourselves as subordinate to the aliens and dependent upon them when they tell us this is the only way your race is going to be able to survive. And they reinforce our dependence on them by warning us of the impending disasters from which only they can save us. I wish I had time to discuss what they may really be doing with the sperm and ova and fetal material they take from us, but I have yet to see confirmed proof that it has anything to do with hybridizing either their species or ours. Through the manipulation of what we think they're doing and what they tell us, they also propagate the belief that their intrusions are ultimately beneficial in purpose, in spite of the fact that so much of the specific abduction events are painful, traumatic, and debasing to the person involved. We have many well-known accounts, abduction accounts, or should I say contact accounts, in which a person has been given a very positive, spiritual experience, sometimes with physical healing or expanded intelligence, psychic abilities, and these abductees feel very compelled to go out and tell you about their situations and proclaim that the spiritual benevolence of the aliens is all there is to it. And such reports can almost make you forget about the numerous other reports in which abductees experience great pain, suffering during their abductions, as well as severe, sometimes even fatal physical after effects and emotional distress.
Okay, so my total full beliefs about all of this going on, my beliefs are constantly changing as more stories come out, as there are more whistleblowers and just more government information that is released about what is happening to people, how our military is involved in interacting with people. My thoughts change day to day as to whether these kinds of programs and disclosure is happening because fights between factions, or whether there's just, again, research happening on us as humans, almost like we are like just another creature within a zoo, and planet Earth is this particular zoo, but then there's a whole kind of like world outside of it, which would be all the other planets and places in space. So either one of those things could be happening for why we are contacted and these things are happening to us. But then my mind keeps on coming back to Carl Nell's kind of comments on like, find God, have faith, and like, what does that mean, and why would that be so important? And just based on my own interactions with non-human intelligence, and the fact that they've told me that they are messengers of God, and they have given me premonitions that have come true. They've provided like wonderful information to me that I found to be useful. And they appear in the sky, like they are just kind of coming out of nowhere and then disappearing. And on one occasion, like this big, beautiful orb just like kind of turned into a person, which I would almost say is like angelic in nature, or godly. I do have to take into consideration that maybe the spiritual aspect is why this is happening. And so a long time ago, I heard this theory that we might be hybridized with these types of grays or non-human intelligence because our bodies are vessels. And this is something that Bob Lazar has even mentioned, or containers. And so these beings might be just creating more containers for souls. There are multiple people that have died and come back, and they have said that there are so many souls that kind of exist on the other side in this kind of heavenly, just everything realm, like the place where our souls kind of exist once we pass away. Because there's so many souls and so few bodies relative to how many souls exist, there aren't that many opportunities to kind of come to Earth School, or to kind of go through the physical living experience in order to learn and evolve. And there is this possibility that these non-human beings, these grays, these mantids, just these whoever, the Nordics, whoever is coming to people and engaging in these hybridization programs, they might be doing it explicitly to create new little fetuses and bodies for the souls to move into, because we're kind of not making enough children and not providing enough opportunities for people to come here. And I mean, this is going to be, again, catastrophic. I mean, it's going to be kind of mind-blowing and incredibly disruptive to people if they find out that this is the reason why we are in contact with these beings, or why they physically come to some of us and take some of us, and we find kind of physical artifacts of having been taken or having something happen within our homes. Yeah, so I suppose that my thoughts will be morphing, changing, moving around as we get more information. Hopefully, as we get more information. I know that it is, I can only use the word so many times, it's very disturbing, but I think that it is our right to know what's been happening to us and why it's been happening to us if people have answers. I know that there are experiencers that have been told why they've been taken, why they've been contacted, why these things have happened to them. I won't name specific names of abductees, contactees, because that's their stories to tell, but in many cases it does tie back to this spiritual perspective, and everything having to happen for like the soul evolving, or just spiritual development. So if you have any thoughts on whether hybridization or crossbreeding is going to be the reason for disclosure, or if you think that like this won't even be discussed at any point in the next 5, 10, 20 years, please let me know. This has bothered me for quite a while. I've spoken about hybridization on this channel before, and it just seems like, again, everything is coming to a head with now all these people kind of talking about it collectively, all in the same kind of time period. It's why would they be saying it if it wasn't going to be publicly released, like all of this information? So thank you so much for listening today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.